Welcome again, everybody, to another episode of Timber Ninja Radio. We've got Jordan on here with us, and then we also have a very special guest, a person that, if any of you guys are serious hunters and in the social world and listen to podcasts, you've probably heard of this man, and a person that I think a lot of, to be honest with you, and known for a few years now. And, it's really glad to be able to call this person a friend. And we got none other than Mr. Nathan Killen, old mountain hunter. How you doing today, buddy?
Well, considering I just came off a night shift and I've probably had 2 hours of sleep this morning, I'm doing all right. So,
oh man, I know you're transitioning from nights to days. I did that myself back when I worked on riverboats. It's a hard transition.
Yeah, I probably should have shotgunned a monster and put some eye makeup on or something. That probably make me look a little bit better. Actually, Big A, if he listens to this, he hurt my feelings last night. He said that Ethan Roderick was prettier than I was. He is such a player because whenever he talks to me, he tells me I'm the prettiest. So
I know.
I don't know.
I mean, can you really trust a man that's telling somebody their looks if he wears holy jeans and his hat around backwards and sleeveless shirts all the time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's a bum.
Oh, man. Yeah, man, we're really glad to have you on. And I know, you're tired, you got stuff going on, but we really appreciate you taking the time. We've heard a lot of things, like I said, before we even met each other, I'd followed you for years because, I hunt in the mountains since I've moved to Western North Carolina. Jordan grew up in the mountains, so he's done this his whole life. And, I think the one thing that's unique about all three of us is we're all three pretty much solo hunters. And that was really hard for me to find people that hunted low deer density mountains like we do. I mean, you're only a couple hours away from us. You're in Virginia and we're in North Carolina, but you hunted with a stick bow, and that was about the time I think I was getting into the stick bow, I believe. And then I saw you were doing all these big, backcountry type hunts, and I was like, this is the first person that I've seen of all the folks that get interviewed and are, putting stuff out on social media. You were the first person that I ever saw that I felt like related, I could relate with.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings up a question, why do you hunt?
I hunt for the adventure, to be honest with you. Always have. I mean, I'm not starving to death, obviously, so I don't have to do it for food, but yeah, just for adventure. I have an adventurous spirit about me. And since I've been just a little kid, before I got my driver's license, even in the, I grew up on a small farm, my grandfather's farm. And I think I got my first bow probably whenever I was around 6 or 7. It was just a little old Ben Pearson bow that my mom and dad got me. And I would be gone for all day. Mom would just pretty much turn me loose and I would be out chasing rabbits with my little compound and shooting at birds and stuff like that. And it's just always stuck with me, just wanting to always be outside, running around in the woods, so. And of course, once I got older, got to where I could drive and stuff, by then, me and my dad had been hunting for a little while as far as deer hunting. And once I got my driver's license, instead of doing what other teenagers and stuff were doing, I was out, running around the mountains, it's just what I've always wanted to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think people hear us, if they followed us or listened to our podcast, since we've got it going, the one thing that we talk about and, what you said relates to both of us is hunting for adventure. And, I guess from my own perspective, like I look at that, if you live where we all do and hunt where we do with the low deer densities, you have to be hunting for something else than the kill. I mean, wouldn't you say so?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. You visited me the other day and we was talking, and I'm just bringing up this, for example, shed hunting, Shed hunting, I absolutely love shed hunting. Not only because, it gives me opportunity to scout and stuff. I think that's an important time to spend in the woods, scouting for deer. Obviously we shed hunt during the winter months when there's no foliage on and soon after the deer lose their antlers. But I also just love being in the mountains that time of year. The woods are just bare. Nobody else is around. And I would literally walk until my legs fell off. And I love looking at new country, just exploring, going into stuff that I've never been into before, going to places that you can't go during season for fear of, messing your hunting up and stuff like that. But, that's adventure too, so just always looking for that opportunity to get out.
Yeah. I mean, we're really blessed to have as much country as we have that we can explore. I mean, like deer density or not, like we have, obviously all of us have good deer we've killed out of these mountains. There ain't many of them, but it's beautiful that we have so much country that we can explore and take you in these places that are just absolutely beautiful. I mean, you've hunted a lot of places, in the Midwest, and it seems you typically like to hunt terrain more than flat country. And I mean, but has there any of the places you've been, do any of them really match up as far as beauty and scenery to what we have in the Appalachians?
Oh no, I don't think so. I mean, you know how it is. What you're sitting there in a tree and on the side of a ridge or whatever, the leaves are off or even turning. You always have something pretty to look at, and some of the sunsets that we get to see. Whenever we're when we leave out of the tree, there's a place that I hunt and I walk a trail, and it's really steep country to get into where I'm at, and the views are just spectacular, and a lot of times whenever I'm going back to the truck from a day's hunt, the sun is just, the colors in the sky, it's already dark, but still yet, you can see the pretty colors and stuff in the sky. But I just think, how beautiful it is, and just how beautiful God's creation is. We are truly blessed to be where we're at. So,
yeah, thanks. Me too. I mean, it's a wonderful place. So one thing, and we were talking about this before we got on, obviously we promote a lot of traditional bow hunting through Timber Ninja because, that's just the way I archery hunt. I mean, I do gun hunt, I do muzzleloader hunt, and Jordan, he does, but I started with a compound, and Jordan does the same thing, goes back and forth, and you do that. And I got a question the other day on a podcast about when is it appropriate for a person to go trad? And, I think that probably varies amongst, different people, but for you, if somebody asked you that question, what would you say?
Well, that's definitely going to, really, there's only one answer to that, to be honest. And that's whenever you want to. There is no better time than, when you want to, but I do it. I don't do it for any other reason, and it goes right back to the question that we talked about a few minutes ago, is the adventure. It just adds adventure. So, if you got an adventurous spirit and you don't mind to miss opportunities because of the piece of equipment that you have, and you're just, I don't know, just like me, I like the simplicity of it. I like the beauty of it. They, I don't know, there's just something about carrying them, through the woods, So that probably doesn't relate back to the question that you ask as when is the right time. But I think just whenever it hits you, whenever you want to do it, just do it,
Yeah.
So that's probably the best way that I could answer that. You shouldn't do it because of social media, because you see Aaron Snyder doing it or somebody like that. Don't do it to be cool. Do it because it's in your soul to do it.
Well, and a lot of people, I mean, there's guys that's the only thing they've ever shot, or they started with, and so there's not like a barrier to entry that you need to be good with a compound to shoot a trad bow. I mean, shooting a tool is shooting a tool. You have to practice with it at the end of the day. I
Right.
mean, uh, but I know that nostalgia, we talked about that when we were shooting that content the other day and we had my bow out there and just, I'm with you. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's primal. And I know Jordan talked about this when, he hunts with his stick bow. There's just a different feeling you have when you're carrying that thing in the woods.
Yeah. 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 It's, and it's the whole, aura about it or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what the right word is for it, but, yeah, it just adds so much to the experience. And I tell you, whenever you get a deer under you and you start putting pressure on that string or that deer starts coming in and the opportunity is getting ready to happen, it has a totally different feel about it whenever you have that stick bow in your hand than it does with a compound or a gun. And I think because it's so personal, whenever you get to full draw on that deer and you're looking down that feathered shaft of that animal, it's just really, really primal, like you said a while ago. And there's just nothing else that can compare to that feeling at that moment,
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And another question a guy asked me, and this is a question that's hard to answer for people, because, there's a lot of people that have been bow hunting a little, I get a lot of questions from guys that have been doing this. They've been bow hunting for a while with a compound. And I'm not saying 20 years, I mean, maybe 5 or 6 years, but, because there has been an insurgence in the traditional community, people going to shoot bows because of high level influencers. And yeah, they look beautiful out there. Excuse me, the UPS is here. So we were talking about before UPS interrupted that you have a lot of people that get into shooting bows because they see someone else doing it and it looks pretty. And the thing that comes from that, when you go from shooting a compound, your skill set is based on your shot distance and where you position is you got a lot more yardage you can play with, right? And so with a stick bow, you're cutting that down, to half to 2/3 essentially to get that deer, in range that you can make an ethical shot that you're comfortable with, right? So the question was how do you cut that distance? How do you go from hunting 4 trails to that one trail that he's going to potentially take, or like as Dalton says from the Stick Boys, where he's going to place his foot? Yeah. And that's a hard question to answer sometimes, because I think with folks like, the 3 of us that have been doing it for a while, you've been doing a lot longer than us. It kind of comes down to woodsmanship and instinct and gut feeling. I mean, and that's something that, I know the Stick Boys talk about woodsmanship a lot, but, you listen to all these other podcasts and media outlets, people don't talk about that. Would you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, yeah. Experience teaches you a ton of things that podcasts cannot teach you. And it's actually the most important things that you can learn is the things that you learn from experience, And so, a lot of podcasts and stuff like that are, based on tactics and very specific type scenarios. And, whenever you're in the mountains and stuff or anywhere hunting, every single scenario is different. You can go 100 yards around the side of the hill and it's a completely different scenario than what you just walked through, So, hunting as many different, just putting your time in, hunting and spending time in the mountains and stuff, gaining all that intel, the more I've actually got, a little bit of stuff written down here, and it actually talks about exactly that, So I'm going to kind of read from a piece of paper here, but I just wrote down that every situation is different and based off of different variables and conditions. And the better you understand those conditions and how they affect the outcome can increase the success of those different scenarios. And experience is the only way to get better at doing that. I always say that the better hunters make better decisions when they're in the field, and the only way you're going to get better at it is actually spending time, being out there doing what we love to do, and just gaining all that intel. But once you gain all that intel, you're able to, whenever you come into scenarios, be able to pick out, because your spidey senses is going to start going off. That gut feeling is going to start telling you, what the better option is in that scenario to put you closer to that animal whenever it comes through. So that's probably the best way that I could answer that question. And back to the the difference between a stick bow versus compound, setting up, and the opportunities that you're going to lose. Yeah, you're definitely you're probably going to cut your shot distance in half. There's going to be decisions whenever you're choosing the tree that you're going to get into to hang your set is going to be different, because obviously, most compound guys, they're hunting with a bow that is probably, 27, 28, 29, 30, up to 34 inches axle to axle. Well, whenever you get in a stand with a stick bow, the shortest bow that you're probably going to be up there with is 56 inches long, and I personally like a bow that's 58 to 60, 62 inches, somewhere through there. So that complicates things in a tree, so those are other things that you got to think about up there. You have limbs that would normally be in the way or normally not be in the way with a compound that will be in the way with a traditional bow. Opportunities behind the tree are going to be more difficult. You got the seat on your tree stand that might come in contact with your bottom limb, or even the tree itself, or your knee. Your knee, surprisingly, is an obstacle that you got to think about. If you have a deer that comes in under you, that you could come to full draw on a deer and then suddenly realize that your knee is, your limb is against your knee. So, and then there's the shot angle. Used to, whenever I hunted with a compound a lot, a quartering two shot was something that I'd done a lot, and I was a lot of the big bucks that I killed, I would shoot them right in the shoulder, and then whenever I go to mount them, I'd have a big hole that I'd have to repair. So you're not going to be taking that shot anymore. Any kind of steep shot, quartering shot or something like that is pretty much off limits. So timing, of the animal, and shot opportunity is a lot more critical, with the stick bow versus a compound, so there's just so many things that you have to think about that you normally don't think about with the compound, and only experiences can help you vet those problems out, so just analyze the situation really, really good and make the best decision that you can. And if, and learn from the outcome of that situation,
Yeah. Well, and even, in addition to that, like your form and body structure has to be solid to have a consistent shot with the stick bow versus the compound, which, when I started hunting out of my saddle off a little saddle platform with my stick bow, I botched a shot on a good deer in Ohio because he was on my weak side. And even though I kind of leaned all the way out and thought I had my skeletal lined up, I short drawed on him and shot right under him. I mean, cut hair off his armpit because in the moment, just wasn't putting as much attention as I thought to that skeletal structure that you need to get back to where your true anchor point is.
Yeah.
So, and, in talking about that gut instinct, and people hear that from seasoned guys, and it all comes down to, and it relates to woodsmanship. They say the mastery comes after 10,000 hours or 10,000 times doing something. So there's no fast track to woodsmanship or understanding gut instinct. Would you say that is a true statement?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, shoot, I've been doing it I think this season will be my 40th hunting season. So I've been doing it for a long time. And I think somebody mentioned this the other day, and it may have been even you, things that I take for granted or just don't put that much thought into because it's just an easy decision for me might not be that easy of a decision for other people, and you only learn that kind of stuff through experience, So stuff that just comes automatic to me, maybe others would have to put a lot more thought into to figure that out. Or things that I might see in the woods, that are significant, but I play off of it at a glance, whereas others might have to put more thought into the why and when about it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. I mean, you just, it's so hard when you're trying to discuss and educate the new hunters, because that's who, we obviously want to help new hunters, but then also try to help people that are seasoned hunters that want to learn more. And there's so many things I think that a lot of us bypass for a new hunter because it's just second nature.
Yeah. Some of the most basic things are the most important things.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that sounds really simple, but it truly is simple. Understanding the variables and how they affect the outcome of your hunt is one of the most important things that you can, learn. And like air movement, you hear the word thermals, dropping thermals, rising thermals. I mean, it's an extremely almost overused term anymore, but it's a very important thing to learn, and how air movement will affect the outcome of your hunt. Whenever you go into setup, instead of just, whenever you're scouting, you come into a place that looks really good, instead of just going up the very first tree that gives you the closest opportunity, put more thought into it. Drop you a little bit of milkweed and see how the wind is blowing, or how the thermals are moving through that particular spot, and give some thought into the time of day that all this is going on, and when you expect the deer to come through. This is just basic stuff, and but at the same time, it's pretty technical too. But just learning that kind of stuff will help the outcome of that scenario. It's either going to be successful or it's not going to be successful. So just little stuff like that, is the most important part to me. That's decision making right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think so many people get hung up on, like especially running trail cameras, they're focused on where the deer was and not where he's going to be.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, speaking of that, we'll kind of roll into a segment we talked about discussing, and it's scenarios. And we had some scenarios we were going to talk about, like, that we were all kind of going through early season right now, some real time stuff. Jordan's on some good deer. I'm on some good deer. You're on some good deer, and kind of share a little bit about what we have going on. And, as you being the more educated master of the three of us, seeing how you would approach some of these things differently. I know it's hard because, like you said, you can look at a map and you can hear somebody's opinion, but until you really put your feet on the ground, it's really hard to see what type of changes, you would make to what somebody's currently doing that may not be working out. Jordan, give a little synopsis about what you got going on early season.
Sure. Yeah. So Nathan, I've been hunting this buck that I found back in July. Well, I was hunting the area last year, and I think he was one of the deer I was hunting, but I had a camera in there since rifle season last year and went and checked it in July. I wish I'd have left it hanging up, but I just pulled it because I didn't know what would be on it. It's basically a little flat off of a secondary ridge. And it stuck out to me on a map just because it was just a beautiful little flat. It had a deep cut holler coming up on one side of it. It just looked like a place where they'd naturally be crossing or be bedding on it. And there's a laurel thicket off the point. And all through July, until I pulled my camera, he was bedding there about every couple days, sometimes every other day. But it was only from around 12 until evening time. He'd never be in there in the morning. I hardly ever got night pictures of him or night videos of him. So, I was hoping there in the first week or so that I could slip in there in the morning and actually come up. To your point about paying attention to where you set up, my thoughts when I came up was coming up that deep cut and hanging on a tree just on the edge of it. So in the evening, my thermals would be sucking down that deep cut, and he was coming up from the other side. So, I mean, the scenario seemed perfect for me. I'm not sure if he has changed his pattern or not. I mean, it's that we're lucky in the fact that we get to hunt early September so we can catch them in that summer pattern, but it's also that time of year where if you don't get it done in the first week or week and a half, it's like, flip the script. So it's kind of that point now where I'm like, do I still hunt there and hope that he's still bedding there? I put a camera in there the other day after I left, and I had some does come in there at dark on top of me. But really, I'm just trying to figure out now what to do. And if, there's still heavy foliage there. So not sure if he's still bedding there or if he's not. I guess my question is if you had that kind of situation or any situation where you found a buck and you kind of have an idea of what he's doing at that time of year, that time of day, what are you doing with that information? Are you trying to find where he's hanging out the rest of the time, where you think he'd be coming from, or what, how do you approach those situations when you found a buck that you specifically want to hunt?
Well, we got to consider right now, and you just mentioned it, is, deer are transitioning a little bit, but he's still there. They don't go very far, but you've got to realize that these bucks, they have a lot of food right now. And they have really, really shrank down their core area. So he's there. But what I would do is I would get my stand on my back and I would just go on a scouting mission looking for the very precious sign that I could find. And because I'm telling you, would be surprised at how small of an area these bucks are using right now. It would depend on the situation, but some bucks may limit their movement to just, maybe 5 acres, maybe less, and if you're not right in that spot, you will have zero chance of catching him on a trail camera. You'll have zero chance of seeing that deer, and you most certainly will have zero chance of killing him. So you have to really be in the hot seat. And the only way that you can do that is to really, go in with your stand on your back, preparing to kill him whenever you find the right, type of sign, which is going to be, right now the bucks have just came out of velvet. A lot of oaks are dropping acorns. So, I would be looking for some of the precious rubs that I could find. A few scrapes are starting to open up right now. And then what's significant about those scrapes is bucks' hormones are starting to kind of, rise there. And so that they kind of have a flurry of, and my trail camera is actually showing that right now. I'm starting to have bucks hitting scrapes right now. Matter of fact, just last night, I had 2 or 3 bucks hit a scrape last night, my cell camera. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for in conjunction with what food is available right now. White oaks, I kind of made a little scouting mission here just a couple of days ago, and I found a couple of white oaks that were dropping acorns, and they're just raining down. It'd be easy to set up right there. The ground was just tore up under that white oak. But, I would just go in to where that he's at, keeping, your impact as low as possible. And, in other words, go in, keep the wind in your favor. But when you're scouting, try not to touch, once you start getting into, you realize that you're getting into where that deer is at, don't touch anything. You don't, and go up a tree where, you feel like that he's going to show up in that type of spot. You want to be close enough to where he's bedding, because obviously if his core area has really shrank down, then he's going to be really close whenever you start coming in, getting into that fresh sign.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've approached it that way as far as not touching anything. And I mean, from the time it's about half mile off the trail I come in on down. I mean, that whole half mile, I'm almost still hunting through there. I mean, I'm not making a peep. I'm getting in the tree silent. But to your point, I mean, the one of the issues that I'm having is that there's acorns everywhere this year up there. I mean, and I'm finding some good sign. I found, a couple 100 yards above that bed, some pretty good sign of deer feeding under a red oak, but it was just skylined. And I'm like, I guarantee there's does eating right here, but I don't see him coming in there in the daylight. So I just need to, I think, like you said, continue to be mobile and maybe push in a little bit farther and just try to find the freshest sign.
Yeah, because, even though, there is a lot of acorns, this year, there's still going to be spots that he's going to prefer over everything else, so I would just take that into consideration,
Speaking of that, we talked about this earlier, Jordan and I, and you hear this. So with his core range shrunk because there's food everywhere, he doesn't have to go far to get to food. And we talked about the acorns. People say that deer prefer some acorns over others. Have you noticed that? Like if all trees are dropping, but they want to hit this one. And like let's talk specifically about a mature deer. Is he selecting acorns that taste different, you think, that some people say, or you think it's just more what's most convenient for him to where he doesn't have to move as much?
I think it's most convenient to him, and something else too. It goes right back to the personality of the deer. Generally, if you find a white oak or a chestnut oak or a scarlet oak that's dropping right now, those are some of the ones that they really like right now, especially white oaks and those scarlet oaks, or not scarlet oaks, but chickpea oaks. The ones that's going to show the heaviest sign under them, in my experience, are not the ones that you want to hunt, because it just goes back to that personality that most mature bucks have. They prefer to be by themselves. So you're probably going to see some does, maybe some younger bucks under those trees that are just tore up, but you're probably not going to see the big buck that you're looking for. It's just going to be subtle sign that you're looking for, as far as tracks and feeding sign and stuff like that. And one way that I would probably look at that is, okay, you know that you have a big deer in there, you know where that he kind of likes to be. And I would just start looking for terrain features that that big deer really like to be in or on or traveling through within what you think is his core area. And I would start with those type of places, and most of the time it's going to be away from the other heavy deer sign. I know that's hard to envision or for me to articulate, but I can't stress enough how different these bigger deer are than other deer. That they don't want to be around other deer right now. Once they get their belly full, then they might move off in a certain direction that they want to go and kind of sniff around and stuff, but they're just, they're maybe trying to sniff around for does or something like that, but they're not really looking for that interaction with another deer yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and also during those times, like I feel, and I think you kind of mirror this, and Jordan as well, is don't be afraid to scout during season in fear of bumping that deer and running him out of the country. Because, I mean, what's your opinion on running a deer out of the country if he gets bumped?
You're not going to run him out of the country. You might alter his movements for a few days or something like that. But I think that's about it. If he likes being there, because I know that me and you talked about this the other day. A deer doesn't know that he's being hunted. He just knows that there's something there that wasn't there yesterday or earlier. That's all he knows. And he's just reacting to that encounter with whatever it was, and he may run off, but he's going to come back. If he likes that spot, he will be back. He may come in more cautious. He might be more apt to come in with the wind to his face to make sure that whatever it was that spooked him, isn't there any longer. But no, you're not going to run a deer off. I think it would take major changes to his environment for him to vacate permanently.
Yeah. I mean, you just really got to keep bumping him out of his bed every day before he's just like, hey, this thing, this hide is spoiled. I got to find another one.
Yeah. Well, whatever it is that is bumping him, if it keeps repeating over and over, then obviously he's going to change then,
So you're saying that come deer season, mature bucks don't switch their beds so they can watch parking lots?
No. That's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. Deer aren't, they're not like humans. They don't make decisions. So, well, I shouldn't say they don't make decisions, but they don't make decisions like we do. They don't think through things.
Yeah.
We think through things and we're able to tell you why we did what we did. A deer can't do that.
Yeah. I used this example with a guy the other day that we were having this discussion, and he was saying that deer in different regions are harder to hunt because of more pressure. And I'm like, well, I've hunted a lot of places and deer act like deer. I mean, like maybe there's not as many deer, so they don't lay down as many scrapes or, do that kind of stuff. But overall, deer act like deer. The humans, may somewhat make them change a little bit. But like a good example is, how many times have you missed or actually hit a deer and heard other people talk about this from a stand, and then the next year turn around and kill that same deer? And I use the analogy. It's like, if I lived in Detroit and my house was getting robbed every day, I wouldn't leave for a few weeks and move back to that house again the next year, because like that experience, of knowing that that's going to happen again, would push me out of there. So, if that was the case, deer would never do what they do. Right.
That's exactly right. I tell you, I was listening to a podcast. It's probably been 6 to 8 months ago. And this just kind of gives you an idea of how some people view deer. But I was led to believe by the pretty much how this podcast started out, and even the title of it, that this person was I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to put a label to him, but anyway, I started listening to the podcast and I got just not very far into it, and I couldn't stand to listen anymore. But this guy basically was talking about this couple of bucks that he was hunting, and he said that this deer, whenever he would come to his trail camera, that he would run in front of the trail camera and then jump back really quick to have his trail camera take a picture, basically just a blank picture. And then once the trail camera would take the picture, then the deer would go on through because he knew that it had taken the picture. Or he would send another deer through to get its picture taken, and then it would go through. I don't know. Some people just blow my mind at some of the things that they come up with to just say on podcasts. So
it wasn't a podcast where they're selling trail cameras, so they want you to buy more so you can put them at different angles, is it? No. Well, let's keep going with the scenario. So, I mean, you guys are in my circle and know that I've been after a deer, one deer that I hunted all last year that I'd found in 2020. And I was getting daylight pictures of him in October. I knew where his bed was, but his bed was on private because honestly, like I wasn't paying attention to my map when I went there in 2020 and ended up on private and saw this big sign and, moved my way back. But I knew there was a good sized deer in there and put cameras in there, during 2021 and was getting daylight of him and trying to figure him out. And then throughout the season, the scenario here, this piece, it's a long, essentially north-south ridge that kind of has a little bit of the north end is a little more angled to your northeast. And I hunted him all year closer to his bed, even, because I couldn't go to his bed. And, obviously, I was there when he wasn't, typical pattern, right? And then later in the year, I moved down to this other terrain feature because it's a really steep ridge to get in there. It's 35% grade to get to the top. And then it's a knife ridge that runs down, and it has finger ridges coming off. And, really based on what I hear you talk about where you live, which is similar to me, it moved me to focusing more on that east facing sides, as far as mature buck travel. And right off that north end to the north, a northeast finger ridge comes down and it drops really steep, 35 degrees, sometimes 40 degrees. And then there's a flat. And I went in that flat during gun season last year, and it was just tore up with big buck sign. And I was like, well, this makes sense because it was only between where I knew he had been bedding and had pictures of him. This was only, mile or so down. And I figured that flat would be a good spot. And I put a camera in there. I didn't see him when I was in their rifle season. And I came back, after season because I got sick and had him using that. And then also the other deer that popped through that, I'm calling a roamer at this point, which was a lot bigger. They both were using that during that late second rut, if you want to call it that. So been honed in on him this year. Got pictures of him. I sent you guys working a scrape in September on that northeast ledge. But, I've been hunting that, for the last 2 weekends and not seeing him. I mean, there's good sign there, good buck beds. But, I think, from my opinion, if he was there last year, bedding up there and making daylight sightings on that more southern point, I would assume he's still back on that southern point this year. Wouldn't you think so?
Yeah. And I think that, I think you're on to that deer. Because, you've showed me the topo and stuff like that. The bad thing about these mountain bucks and really any mature buck in, the east, southeast, or whatever, they're just so darn unpredictable. You could be in the right spot today, but it might not be for the right spot tomorrow. Or you might be in the right spot that would be the right spot tomorrow, but not for today. And our trail cameras really prove that. I think that we're good at choosing the right spots. We just have such a limited amount of time to spend in those type of spots for the scenario to play out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like the buck that I'm one of the bucks that I'm hunting this year, and I described that scenario before you pushed record there. And even though I know right where that deer is at, I still only get a picture of him right there where my camera's at, once or twice a week. And it's almost like it's you'll have him today and tomorrow, and then he's gone for a few days. And then you'll get a one random picture. So, I think that he's definitely there, and I think that you're on to him. I believe that it's just going to take just some time and a little bit of luck on your side for that scenario to play out for you.
Yeah, because the more I think about it, and I know I sent this, I know I sent it to Jordan and discussed it with him, and I believe I sent it to you, is on that northeast side, all the pictures and video I have of him from last year and this year is always at night. Like the other night, he showed up at like 8:30, 8:45. So he was, let's say, 45 minutes into dark, and he always comes from the same direction. And a deer can cover in 45 minutes. He can cover a pretty good bit of country in that time. So I shrunk back and found, and this is going to be something that, relates to us as mountain hunters. I backtracked a little bit midway down that ridge, and you can see where all that those topo lines show that's that 30, 35, and then there's another little micro bench there that looks with some draws and terrain features, in my opinion, because those terrain features are really going to dictate that buck's movement through the mountains. And he's going to essentially take the path of least resistance that he can. I mean, what do you?
Yeah, for sure. The one thing that I've noticed about big deer is, most of our decisions are based off, as far as how we set up in certain spots, is based off of how we see 90% or even more of the rest of the deer use those type of scenarios. So we get to see big bucks do what big bucks do so very little that we're essentially not as educated on how they move through areas as we are other deer. So we can't set up in major terrain features like we would, and you kind of have a major terrain feature there, I feel like, and it's kind of that there's a big saddle from what I remember between the two places that you had that deer. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's really steep on both sides.
Yeah.
So, and when he comes out on that saddle, because I've gotten pictures, he pops up on that east side right off the edge, and he'll work a scrape there. And it's kind of like, to me, he's not walking the top of that saddle. He's going to drop back down and cover that east side.
Yeah. So, that east side, and of course, your area, but I would be looking for, obviously, where the deer beds a whole lot, and kind of where he's wanting to end up. So I would abandon traditional type spots that deer would like to use, and I would be looking on those steep sides of areas that that's going to pinch him down, because obviously, and I think that it sounds like you found one. Just those little bitty terrain features that he's going to move through, and he may be the only deer that's even coming through that type of spot, and so he's not going to leave very much sign or clues for you to realize what he's doing, and but you're using your gut instinct to kind of figure that out too. So
yeah. I mean, we all get hung up on big deer that we're hunting, and I personally, and I'd like to get both of y'all's opinion on this, like, deer, everybody talks about wind, but here in the mountains, the wind's so unpredictable that I feel deer bed more based on sight than thermal. So, like, there's a lot of times a guy will look at a spot and he's not going to be bedding there because the wind's not coming over his back. And I mean, I found that not to be the case a lot of times, especially with a mature deer.
Yeah.
But the thing that, also as people get to hunting them a lot, you want to be in there as much as possible. But if there's not a good change in conditions, like, do you feel like you really need to have that good weather change or something that really is going to get him on his feet?
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, if you'll notice that change is what dictates when deer move and where they move. Weather conditions dictate when they move, and topography dictates that change in topography dictates where they move. So yeah, change is something that we should definitely be paying attention to. And we all know that, like, the first cold front that we have in October is always good. And I've killed a lot of the target deer that I've been after during that time period, So yeah, change is good.
In this early season, what are you really looking for? Like, if you got a target deer and you got one, I know y'all open up in October 1st, I believe. Like for us, we had a good cold snap last week. It was probably the coolest we've had. And now it's going back hot. And when we saw a lot of deer movement, on camera and stuff on that cold snap that happened last week. But now this week, it's jumping up until the 80s. And then Friday, we're going to have about a 15-degree drop with a high on Friday of like 70 degrees. Would you feel that's like an optimal time to be there? Like, for that big change?
I absolutely do, because we know that temperature changes, weather changes trigger deer movement of, all deer. But sometimes we can get discouraged because we can be set up in our premium spot and not have that encounter that we hope to. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't moving. He probably was moving. He may have went the opposite direction you thought that he was going to go that day,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, even on a bad day, it's really not bad to hunt because like hunts are scouting essentially too. You're gathering intel.
That's right. Yeah.
So we talked about ours. I mean, your season's coming up. What's your scenario that you're really looking forward to for the opener, like plan without giving too many details?
Well, I won't get to hunt the buck that I'm hoping to get here in Virginia during our opener because I'm going to North Dakota, but I'll be back. But I know
what about your well, that's a good segue. I mean, you're going to North Dakota as your first hunt. Like, how you break that down for like what your plan is there?
Well, that's going to be completely different scenario for me. I've never hunted that type of area, but my plan is I've been on my mapping apps, obviously scouting like you always would do for an out of state hunt, and I've got a ton of places marked. And my plan is just to pretty much hit the ground running with a stand on my back, going into each one of those places and not really slowing down until I get into some, high odds scenarios. It's going to be some funneling type terrain features that's going to have some really good deer sign in them, in conjunction of what I would feel like would be, some good bedding because 1st of October, they're not moving very far. So you're going to have to be very, very close to where that deer is bedding, So basically just, mobile hunting at, that's pretty much going to be the definition of what mobile hunting is. Just scouting with stand on my back. And whenever I come into something good, spend some time there. So.
What is a good piece of advice for guys that are just starting to travel out of state that you look at, like as far as going to a new area? I mean, obviously you can look at maps and pick out terrain features. I mean, what is the number one thing that you think makes a success versus a failure?
I think, just going into places that are very diverse as far as habitat and terrain. Because that creates a lot of change. I just talked about change a while ago. The more change you have in topography and habitat, the higher deer density you're going to have. It can support a lot more deer. And once you go into those type of spots, just consider the conditions. Go in pretty easy. And one way that I like to do it is I'm going to use Ohio for an example. If there's a ridge that I'm wanting to hunt, I will go in and pretty much the first really hot sign that I come into, I'm probably going to hunt it if it looks good to me. If everything, looks right, I will hunt it. And generally what I do is I'll go into a new area during the evening. I don't go into it blind in the dark. I think that you can really miss a lot of things, but I will go in, I will hunt the first really good sign that I come into that evening. And if I still like what if my spidey senses is still going off, then I will hunt it the next morning. And what I see then will dictate what I do that evening. If I'm not seeing deer, if I just, things just ain't feeling right, then I will pack up and I will go scouting again. And I will do that process over and over until I get myself into what I would consider the hot seat. I know without a doubt, if I spend a little bit of time in this spot, then the opportunity is going to happen. And 9 times out of 10, it does, So going into new spots, I think, just stay mobile, scout until you put yourself into the very best scenario that you can, and 9 times out of 10, it pays off.
One thing we were talking earlier about bypassing stuff that a lot of people that maybe don't have the experience, because we always kind of think and talk off of like things that are kind of second nature. And you mentioned hot sign. One thing I think, and I failed to do this on a recent podcast, because I said exact same scenario you did. Like always going in the evenings to a new spot, never, because we're not looking to get in a tree. We are, but like it's not worth your time to get in a tree until you have the sign. But
Yeah.
not all hot sign is going to be sign of where you're going to kill that deer, because
Right.
Because it could be night sign, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to look for, it goes back to the looking for the right scenario. If you're hunting big deer, that you're going to have to be close to bedding. If you're scouting and you come upon a flat or something other like that just ripped up with big buck sign, and there's absolutely no doubt that there's a big deer using that, and that it's fresh. He's using it now. That's very important now. But then I'm going to go on my mapping app, whether it's Spartan Forge or Onyx or whatever it is. Sorry about that. That's my daughter leaving for work. Can you hear that?
No.
Okay,
No.
we're good. But anyway, once I come into that hot sign, I'm going to start looking at what terrain features that a buck might be bedding on that's going to be close to that, or anything that I think that he might be bedding, and then I'm going to start working my way in that direction. As long as the wind is good and stuff like that. So, and then that's how I'm going to set up. And that goes back to that gut feeling again. I've run into this good sign. I see a potential for bedding that's close by. The wind is going to, I feel like the wind is good for me to hunt that, between where I found that sign and where I think that maybe that deer is bedding. And if I start working back that direction and I'm seeing some really good sign, maybe a couple of big rubs or big tracks or whatever, and the scenario looks good, I'm going up a tree right there, and with high hopes. And I'm going to hunt it that evening. I want to hunt it probably the next morning, as long as I feel like that conditions are right. And I'm also going to consider how I'm going to get into that the next morning, because most likely, if you are in the right in a good scenario, that deer is going to be right where you found that good sign, and you don't want to walk through that, trying to get to where you've been up a tree.
Yeah. Well, and as far as looking at your maps and backtracking to where you think it could be bedded, what do you think, like in an early season scenario, how far do you think is the max distance you should be from his bed?
Well, I think that's going to be determined by the scenario. If I mean, obviously you want to be as close as possible, that's going to be very scenario dependent, because let's say that you've come upon a white oak that's dropping really good sign. That there's a big buck using that during the night, but the bedding, the best bedding may not be, but it may be 100 yards away, or it may be half a mile away. So obviously I want to be as close as I can to where he's bedding, but if he's not traveling very far, then I'm probably going to err to the side of being closer to that white oak than I am to where he's bedding, because that's a really small scenario. Maybe that may be the best way that I can describe it, because he's not traveling very far. And if you go in too aggressive, then you're going to just mess yourself up, especially for that evening hunt. And possibly the next morning too. It may be a day or two before he, comes back to that scenario. Especially if there's a lot of food available, because if there's a lot of food available and you bump him off at that food source, or even where he's bedding, he may only have to go to the next terrain feature around the side of the hill to feel comfortable again.
Jordan, you got any questions related to that, or any?
Yeah, I had a question. Nathan, you were talking about finding, you found the big buck sign, you found the terrain features, and this is for a out of state hunt where your time's limited. So once you find that spot, and I know this is it all falls back to our gut feeling, right? Like it's hard to answer every question, but just as a general statement, how long, well, I guess let me ask it this way. When you found your spot, are you going all in on that spot for the duration of your trip? And how long are you going to give that spot before you're like, okay, maybe this isn't as good as I thought, and I'm going to try to find somewhere else? I know it's hard to answer that question, but
Yeah.
is that kind of how you approach it?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I go in, I find what I feel like is a high odds situation, and I will hunt it. And I will hunt it that evening. I will hunt it the next morning. And if everything still feels really good and the conditions are still good, I'm talking about, the wind, obviously, that I feel like that I can keep hunting that spot, then that's exactly what I'll do, but if I hunt it, this evening, then I hunt it in the morning, and I don't know, I just don't have as good a feeling about it, as I did initially, then I have no problem, pulling my set and moving on, looking for something better. So, every scenario is different.
Oh yeah, absolutely. My other question was, has there been times where you have found certain terrain features or something where, and maybe you have pictures of a buck, a buck is there, he's frequent in the area, but the access or the way you can hunt it is just, almost impossible? Will you just say, well, I'm going to go find somewhere where there's another buck that I can hunt, or will you try to force it and hunt that deer?
Well, I don't think that there's impossible scenarios, because there's always a way to hunt. It may not be ideal where you want to set up, but I don't believe in impossible situations, I guess. Well, I mean, obviously they are, like, I don't know, maybe a buck is moving from his bed. Maybe he's bedding lower and moving to high ground to feed. That's a little bit, that could be a tricky scenario, especially for evenings. Once thermals start dropping, then you're probably not going to see that deer. So the next morning mornings would probably the better scenario there, because your scent is going to be dropping into where he's wanting to bed. But now you're going to have to be really precision about how you're set up right there to be able to kill him. And you're going to have to kill him that day, because if you don't, then you're probably never going to get another chance. And that would be an example of an impossible situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I mean, in the mountains, it's good if you can approach from the bottom, but like how our terrain lays and private ground or whatever, like most times I have to come in from the top on most of my spots. Like there's just not an option from the bottom. And so, but I guess in those scenarios, what do you say? Like, especially if you know where he's dialed, you just have to make a bigger loop and go out of your way to get to that spot. Really, that's the best scenario, correct?
Yeah, and that can be a huge pain in the hind end.
Absolutely.
I've had to do that several times, and it's hard to do stuff like that, especially 2 and 3 days in a row. Because it wears on you a lot. Not only are we not seeing very much, but we're putting our bodies through a lot to put ourselves in the right situation.
Yeah. I can speak from experience on that. Like, especially this deer I'm hunting now. The other night it was hot, and I got back to that spot, and my underwear were just soaked just from being so sweaty. And like every time I would move, I could just smell myself come up. Like, and like I know you've been in this situation, and I had to go out of my way to get down to that flat, like I was telling you that I was hunting, and I've spent a lot of time in the mountains and doing endurance stuff, running them and hiking them, whatever. And I get anxiety at night before I go into this spot, like thinking about it. I'm like, God, I do not want to do this.
That those type of scenarios, a lot of times it's better to look for the right scenario that has a good deer in it than to try to hunt a deer in a bad scenario. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
A lot of times I will look for deer in what I would consider a good scenario to hunt, because that kind of puts everything into your favor then, and then it makes it easier to hunt those deer effectively.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I was getting at, and that you just answered my question of not an impossible, but if you can find a better scenario that lends itself to access is better, you're going to have a more consistent wind. Will you just give up on the other spot? Not give up on it, but say, hey, I got way better odds over here. I'm just going to focus on this spot instead of trying to force this one to work.
Yeah. And, I kind of done that in Ohio this year or this past season. That's kind of how I killed that buck. I had scouted the area. I started hunting it, and I don't know. I just did not feel like the sign that I was seeing was being made by a mature deer. Now, that doesn't mean that one wouldn't come through there, but I didn't feel like that there was one there at that moment in time. And but I still went ahead and gave it a few days and hunted it, and eventually had an encounter with the deer. And he was a decent deer, but he really, especially on out of state hunts, I'm not necessarily worried about hunting the biggest deer that I can possibly find, but at the same time, I'm going to try to put myself into the area that's going to have the very best deer that I could hunt. Does that, I hope that comes across right. But, I still hunted that area for a few days, and I had an encounter with the deer, and he was kind of what I kind of expected that he probably was. And so I went ahead and abandoned that situation, and went and found another spot that I had never been into. And within 2 sits, I killed a nice deer, but I didn't kill the deer, probably the big deer that was there. But I was starting to, our time was starting to dwindle down, and I was willing to shoot, anything that made me happy. And, but I do feel like that there's a bigger deer there,
Yeah. Well, the in reality, the odds of killing the biggest deer in there, if you had all season, are slim to none. So to kill a deer like you killed with a trad bow on a public piece of ground is a huge accomplishment in itself. So, yeah.
Yeah. The problem is, it's easy to say jump to another spot, but like where we live, these big deer aren't hiding behind every tree. So, when I find one, I'm like, oh, I got to figure out a way to hunt that one. Cause if not, I don't have like 16 backup plans. I don't live on 1,000 acres in Iowa.
Yeah. And hunting out of state, you can afford to be a lot more aggressive than I'm going to use an example of some big bucks that I've hunted here in Virginia for multiple seasons. Bucks like that, if they're not getting pressured by other people and you pretty much have those deer to yourself, and which is just about, I almost have that scenario every year.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hunt those deer a lot more carefully than I am, say, if I happen on a really big deer on an out of state hunt. A scenario like that, I'm gonna hunt that deer. I'm gonna take chances, because most of the time it's the chances that's gonna help you kill that deer. Now, the deer that I'm hunting in Virginia this year, that's a little bit different scenario. If I want to kill that deer, I about have to kill him during October. I've got history with this deer. This is 3 years now. And that deer is there until around Halloween or just a little bit into October, the 1st of November. And then after that, he leaves out there. And I do know kind of how he uses after that, but it's very, very unpredictable. Whereas October, right now, he's going to be very predictable, so I'm going to try to capitalize on that. And it's going to be timing, even though I know right where he's at and I know right where to kill him, it's still going to take some luck to be able to kill that deer, because I've got to be there whenever he moves through that spot. And he doesn't move through that spot every single day, but he's very, very close.
Yeah. And that kind of segues into the next thing we were talking about or going to talk about is it's kind of early season tactics, rut tactics, and late season tactics. And that, I guess, from my perspective, that changes based on if you're hunting out of state or if you're hunting at home.
Yeah.
When do you feel like between these is like your best time to kill a mature deer?
I think if you're after a very specific deer, I feel like October into the first week of November is your best chance. After that, all bets are off. He could be anywhere. Now, for out of state hunts, I feel like hunting, obviously during the rut is best because then you're really focusing on areas that are going to funnel big bucks through, or compounding terrain features where you have a whole lot of terrain coming into one spot because that maximizes the opportunity that you're going to have right there. And then, you could still kill a specific buck in those type of places, but I just feel like that, and not all bucks are the same. That goes back to the personality thing. Some bucks would just breed the does within his core area, and then after that, he's done. Whereas other bucks, and I think the more mature a buck gets, the more likely that scenario is, but still, you still have really big deer, older age class deer that are roamers too. So you always have to take those type of things into consideration whenever you're hunting specific deer as to where and how and when you're going to hunt him, And then, obviously late season, well, I know around here up until about the first week, actually the first week of December is a fantastic time to kill a really big deer. And generally it's a really big deer that is out roaming looking for does outside of his core area, and then after that, then they tend to go back into their, where they're originally from. So then I would start looking at some of the better food sources and stuff, to be a hunting. So you're always transitioning from different scenarios all through the season,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because obviously out of state early season tactics, you talked about that earlier, you're focused more on bedding and food. Whereas, coming to like when they're moving and pre-rut and stuff, which, I think we both kind of have the same feeling, like right before the peak chasing time is the quality time to hunt out of state. And that's going to be all of your terrain features like hubs, spokes, spider webs, whatever you want to call them, saddles, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Early season, I'm focusing on the food sources that he's going to be hitting within his core area, and that core area is going to be really small. And then once we start getting close to Halloween into the first week of October, by then I'm going to be pretty familiar with where that buck likes to be, and then I'm going to start hunting some terrain features outside of his core area that he might move through, when he's starting to make some small rounds looking for does. And then after that, I'm going to start looking for major terrain features or habitat type of areas that's going to be a major type funnel to put as many bucks as possible in front of me. And then after that, I'm going to start almost going backwards,
Yeah. I think that's things that, especially like new guys, they get hung up on specific tactics and apply those tactics all year long. And it's just, that's why they have a lot of sits where they're just sitting there looking around at influencers on IG or something. Now, you've talked a lot about the deer personalities, mature deer personalities. Elaborate from your philosophy on that a little bit.
Well, bucks, even whenever they're young, some bucks are still going to be really, really shy deer, and then other bucks are going to be a lot more social. All right, the more social ones are going to tend to act more like what we think of as normal deer behavior, like, does and stuff like that. So those bucks aren't going to reach maturity very often because, and goes back to how hunters, hunters are used to seeing how normal deer act. So that's how they hunt. They hunt based off of that. So the bucks that are acting more normal deerish, if you want to call it, those are the ones that everybody is basically hunting, and that's the ones that are getting killed. The ones that are a lot more shy, have a more reclusive type personality that's not acting like normal deer, are the ones that are making it to maturity. So people really don't know how to hunt those type of deer because they're so used to hunting deer that act more like deer. So that's I feel like that's one of the reasons that 90% of your hunters never kill or only kill one or two in their lifetime because they're hunting deer and not individual bucks.
People hunt the deer sign where all the deer are showing up, and there's good sign in there, and even some of those, I guess in my opinion, some of those extroverted deer, if it's an area that has a lot of deer and it's an area like, let's say, the Midwest, say Iowa, that has a lot of deer in general, some of those extroverts can get to be really big deer or really good sized deer, but it's at a lower age class, whereas the older age class are typically going to be your more introverted.
Yes. Yeah. And the more extroverted a deer is going to be, the more aggressive he's going to be too. He's going to leave a lot more sign in most instances. These older age class bucks that have made it to the 6, 7, 8-year-old age, they may have not left very much sign through their whole lifetime, and they can almost live undetected. So I mean, those are things to consider too. I've hunted a lot of places that have had a giant living there, and based off the sign, you would never know that he was there because, one, he's not traveling like other deer or through the areas like other deer, so he's leaving very little sign, and he's not as active as some of the younger bucks in the rutting activity. So, you might have your trail camera set on the biggest scrape that they are in the area and have a ton of big buck or a ton of bucks using that, but you could still have a 6 or 7, 8-year-old deer that's living there that's never coming to that scrape, and actually I see that a lot here in the mountains.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know we were scouting this past winter. We came across a spot that had a lot of good sign on this. It was like a flat, like on a knob. And you talked about that scenario, and one thing you said was he may be an introvert, but it doesn't mean he's not aware of what the extrovert and other deer are doing. He's just using it different. Would you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, it's just like a scrape. He doesn't have to go to that scrape to understand what is going on in the area. He still, he could pass by that scrape downwind of it a little bit and get all the information that he wants to from it. And I think that deer like that are masters at using thermals, for example, of getting all the intel that they need without actually having a encounter or whatever with other deer. It's the same scenario as you've heard about the big bull and the little bull up on the hill. The little bull says, let's run down there and have our way with one of those cows. And he's more like, well, let's just walk down there and have our way with all of them. It's kind of the same scenario. He can basically, well, how many big bucks, older age class bucks do you see actually chasing does during the rut? You hardly ever see that scenario. He's smarter. He can get the job done with a whole lot less effort. He doesn't have to go through near as much as what the younger age class bucks do to end up with the doe in the end.
Well, he knows how to be more efficient with his energy.
He knows how to be a lot more efficient. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, we're talking about the people that aren't really, they may kill 1 or 2 big bucks or mature bucks. Let's not say big, mature bucks. They were by accident. And because you got less sign for that deer, but
Yeah.
also a lot of them give up because you you can't be hunting deer. You got to be hunting that deer. So you're going to be hunting a lot more without seeing anything. But
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I think hunting individual deer will teach you, well, once you single out very specific deer, then the way that you think about how deer use their area, um, and how they travel through. Well, once you start singling out a big deer, then the way that you think about that stuff changes, because you're looking for little clues that deer are leaving behind, not general deer sign.
mm-hmm.
And once you start doing that, then you start to realize that, hey, this deer isn't doing the same thing other deer are doing. And then you start hunting differently. And that's whenever you start having more encounters with these older age class bucks.
Yeah. And I mean, I think to kind of give somebody a picture of what that looks like is you can have, if you run into a hub that has a lot of good sign, a lot of buck sign, a lot of doe sign, big scrape, whatever, start looking on the outsides. Like say that's in a saddle, look on the fringes for like a little faint trail. And then sometimes he'll give it away because you'll see a rub. And
Exactly.
And also I think what people kind of fail to pick up on, and I'd like your opinion on this, is, and I think I know the answer, but a lot of people always think, especially people that aren't as educated or experienced, they think you got to have this real big sign for a big deer to leave it. But, little things that he can give away is like a sapling that may be 2 inches, but if it's rubbed from bottom to top, or it's just twisted off the ground, a spike's not doing that. Right.
Right. And that's exactly right. That just goes back to woodsmanship, realizing that, a small deer isn't, whenever you find a big deer, you might not always find really large diameter trees, but whenever he rubs a tree or makes a scrape, there's generally a lot more damage done. Like the overhead or overhanging licking branch, generally them big deer, if it's a lot taller than normal and it's as big as your thumb and it's just shredded, and the ground is dished out really heavily, that could be multiple deer doing that. But a lot of times that's, an older age class deer that's leaving that type of sign. And as far as rubs and stuff like that, I do like to find large diameter trees, but the ones that get me excited are the ones that's rubbed higher up on a tree. Those are generally larger statured deer, and obviously, taller racks and stuff like that. You can generally always recognize when you're in a spot that has a very mature deer into it, because the buck sign just looks different,
Yeah. Because I mean, for us, like tracks are great, but it's rare that I see a track in the mountains here because of the ground so hard.
Yeah.
Unless I see where he's been standing in a scrape.
And I'll tell you something back to tracks too. And trust me, I've killed enough older age class bucks that I know that this is true. Not all big deer have big feet. I know now, if you do find big tracks, then I do feel like that you have found a big deer, but the lack of big tracks does not mean that there's not one there. Because trust me, I have killed 5, 6, 7-year-old deer that I mean, I've measured them and compared them to doe feet, and you could not tell a difference.
I mean, the only thing that you really can tell, and this is getting like really deep, is if it's a good track that you can see well, how rounded it is versus pointed too, right?
Yeah, well, sometimes, but that's not necessarily true either. I've seen, I'm thinking of a very specific deer right now that I killed in 2019, and that deer, according to trail camera photos and history, we figure he was an 8 or 9-year-old deer, and by the looks of his track, you would have never or by the looks of his feet, you would have never been able to differentiate his feet from any other deer.
Huh? Like his hoofs hadn't worn that hardly at all.
And he lived in basically rocky terrain. It's very rocky there.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just like people. I work with some guys. I'm a small statured guy, but I work with guys that are shorter than me, but yet they have shoe size 2 or 3 times more than what I do. And then I work with other guys that are taller than me, and I'm thinking about one in particular, and he wears the same size shoe I do. So yeah, I know that a lot of guys, talk about big tracks and stuff, but big tracks are good to find, but that's not anything that I really look for,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's the little minute little details of things like, the high licking branches and the size of the licking branch is getting broken, and the rubs and even with the rubs, like I think a lot of people don't understand how to look at a rub and tell which way the deer was going,
right.
Which is important. And even after you really get dialed into it, if you look at a tree that's rubbed, you can also a lot of times determine what type of characteristics that deer has in his horns too. Like that deer I gave you the other day, when I found that rub, the one rub I saw up on the hill from the creek bottom when I was scouting, I'd initially saw that and could tell it was a big deer with a bunch of trash because of how the center was just completely ripped out of the cedar and killed him. And he has gigantic brow tines, just weird characteristics. And it's just, and to me, it's fun when you put that all together and then you see the animal and everything that your knowledge has told you proves your theory.
Yeah. I think that's one of the major attractions of hunting, especially older age class bucks, is because it's all different. It's always a puzzle that you're trying to put together, and the older the deer, the more crazy the pieces of the puzzle can be.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's what's attractive to me. Once I figure something out, I usually get bored with it and move on.
Yeah. Same. Yeah. If it was easy, I'm not going to do it for too much longer because there's no longer a challenge to it.
Yeah.
Well, I think we covered a lot. The one thing, I was talking about mountain hunting, I do feel like us as mountain hunters in low deer density areas, it does set us up to be good hunters elsewhere. And I feel like a lot of that is because of patience and persistence.
Yeah. Yeah, because we're forced to be. Well, I tell you what, in my opinion, and from my experience, one of the most important characteristics that a mountain hunter can have is patience, dedication, and persistence. If you don't have those, then your success is going to be so low that you're probably never going to have any kind of success. I mean, so that's a characteristic that we're forced to have if we're going to have any success in the mountains at all. And if we carry that with us into a lot better deer territory, then that's kind of an advantage that I feel like that we would have, because we're more willing to wait on a scenario to play out than to try to force it.
Yeah. And the patience, because I mean, time in the tree is more important than anything. Like guys that have more time have the advantage of killing more deer than a guy that doesn't have much time.
Oh yeah. You put a guy that is a good hunter with a lot of woodsmanship that has plenty of time in really great whitetail habitat, he's going to have an impressive trophy room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I always tell people. They'll be like, well, such and such kills so many big deer. I'm thinking of a person in Iowa, and I'm like, after I went to Iowa, I'm like, well, geez, no wonder, like I saw 30 bucks in a week, and 10, I would say 10 that were over 4 years old. Whereas, we may go we may go a lifetime of hunting these mountains without seeing that kind of numbers, but it doesn't mean that person's a better hunter than Nathan Killen, and I'm not just saying that, or a Jordan. It's the opportunity of the cards you're dealt.
Oh yeah, I mean, watch YouTube. Go binge some of these YouTube channels for a day or a night, and I mean, some of these guys are hunting spots, and they will literally see more and better quality bucks in one evening of hunting than we might see in a lifetime of hunting around here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
So
I mean, it's funny that you say that. It's like people are like, hey, why don't you film more of your hunts? I'm like, because they'd be boring. Like,
yeah, film a lot of trees.
Yeah.
A lot of squirrels and red-tailed hawks and stuff.
Yeah, and sunsets. So.
Yeah. That's good stuff, man. Well, I think we covered a really good portion of like strategy and woodsmanship and all these things that I think hopefully will help some people out. Now we're going to roll into a segment that we always end with. It's rapid questions. And I got one for you. I already know the answer, and I think Jordan does, but what's your favorite snack on a tree stand?
Peanut butter and honey sandwiches.
Why is that?
They're easy to make, and I mean they could stay in your pack for a couple of days if you needed them to. But I don't know, man. I love whenever my sandwich just gets really mashed up in your pack, and you pull it out, and the honey is has saturated the bread. It's great.
Got a little crunch to it.
It got a little crunch to it,
Yeah.
and it just increases your chances of having an encounter with the big buck. I mean,
yeah. That's the tip, guys. Put more peanut butter and honey sandwiches in there. If you can, the thing, it won't keep, but one of my favorite things is also putting a slice of banana on that.
Oh yeah.
But the banana they actually don't taste any worse. They just look bad. You open up a pack with 2-day banana and honey and peanut butter sandwich in there.
And it's natural food too. I try not to put things in my pack that are going to be obnoxious as far as smell and stuff like that. So I don't want anything that's going to spook a deer.
Yeah. So you're not popping Red Bulls up in your stand or eating sour warheads or whatever those sour treats are.
Or fruit roll-ups or anything like that.
Yeah. Next one is, what would be your best piece of advice for a hunter that's either starting out or wanting to improve their game?
Just spend as much time in the woods as possible and learn from the experiences that you have. That's the only way that you're going to become a better hunter is by doing it and learning from your mistakes.
Essentially, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Don't get no big hurry, and put some deer on the ground. Get some experience killing deer. The more experience you get putting arrows through deer, the easier it's going to get whenever that big whitetail comes in under you.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of new guys that have, that I know personally, they've only been hunting for a couple of years and they killed like a couple of deer, but all of a sudden they want to learn how to kill mature deer. And I'm like, man, I could probably help you understand where to find them and how to get in on them. But the thing is until you've drawn on deer a bunch of times, when you get that opportunity, you're probably going to botch it just because you're going to do something wrong in taking your bow off the hanger, or you're getting ready to draw, knowing when to draw on a deer and all those little things.
Oh yeah. You need lots of experience shooting deer and actually being in that encounter with other deer before, because I tell you what, whenever unless you're very experienced at it, and some people may never get over this, I don't know, but generally whenever I have a big deer come in on me, it's all business, and I don't get shook up until after everything has already unfolded. But a lot of people just absolutely fall apart whenever a big deer comes in on them, because they just do something to a man, you know. So.
Well, bringing that up, I noticed when I was a younger hunter, and I'd like to hear Jordan's opinion on this too. When I would see a good buck, I mean, at that time, it was just anything. It was like a nice rack buck. I would get so shaky just from seeing him. But like you said, the more I've hunted, when I see those big deer now, like, I mean, Jordan made fun of me one time when I told him this. I have a process. It's like climbing a mountain when you get to a crux and rock climbing, and you're above your gear and it's a scary situation. You got to learn to breathe and focus. It's like yoga breathing to calm yourself. But like now that happens second nature. And then, like you said, after everything goes down, that's when I can't hardly stand up anymore. It's after it happens, but it doesn't happen during the scenario anymore.
Yeah.
I mean,
and only experience is going to teach you that or get you to that point.
I mean, because were you always had nerves of steel, or were you the same way? Did you?
No, I was the same way. I actually, I can remember whenever I was, the first several years I was hunting, I would talk to myself. I would talk myself through that situation. I almost had a certain things that I said to myself. I can't remember what it was, but I can kind of remember being that way, but it was all to try to keep me focused on the task at hand and make sure that everything went as planned, to execute that shot or that scenario,
Yeah. I know the one thing I have to tell myself all the time is remind myself, especially with the trad bow, understanding my shot execution. And I tell myself like multiple times, focus on the spot, just focus on the spot.
Yeah.
I mean, what about you, Jordan? I mean, did you have the same scenario like when you started hunting until now? And I mean, I would say even through your baseball career, you had those moments. I mean,
yeah, I mean, just I'm kind of right in line with you guys, but I can't emphasize enough what Nathan was saying earlier. And I've told so many people this about just killing deer. You've got to kill. And I've had buddies that have started hunting later in life, and they are so, they put so much pressure on themselves from seeing things on social media and TV about, taking the trophy picture with it's got to be 130 or better. And just to y'all's point, it's like, if you've never killed a deer or killed a handful of deer and you finally get that opportunity, I mean, it's so hard for it all to come together, even with experience, but that's priority number one, is just learning how to actually kill deer. But yeah, I'm kind of the same way as y'all. I get tore up more so after the fact. And I think that's a combination of just killing deer, but also, playing baseball. I was a closer for a number of years. So having to come in with, one run up and people screaming at me that I sucked, trying to get me to mess up, helped me learn to calm my nerves. So I'm pretty decent at keeping calm until it's over with. But I tell you, I still get, especially more so with a trad bow, when it's, like that late October, when it's just a little nippy outside and then you have a close encounter but don't get a shot or whatever, and the adrenaline dump and you're a little cold, you just start shaking so bad you can't hardly stay in the tree. That's an awesome feeling. But yeah.
If more people, if you could bottle up and sell that feeling, like, it would be an addictive drug, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just hard to explain. I mean, I'm getting cold chills thinking about it right now, to be honest with you. Like, just those moments. And I even love those moments, like, because it happens to me if a big deer comes in and I don't get a shot when he leaves. I'm like, I hope another one doesn't show up, because well, one last question here. What are some key items outside of your tree stands, your weapon, that don't ever leave your pack, that that you'd always have them there, and it's important for you to have them there?
My peanut butter and honey sandwich. No, I don't know. A pull-up rope, flashlight, my knife. just little items like that. A bow hanger, a bow hanger is really important. You don't want to, especially on an all day hunt, you don't want to be standing there holding your bow all day long because you forgot your bow hanger.
Yeah.
Because then you can't eat your peanut butter and honey sandwich.
Yeah. You can't check social media or any of that stuff.
Yeah, that's right. How are you going to look at your phone? So, it's just simple little stuff like that. And actually, just this year, I've kind of started doing things a little bit differently. Used to, I had kind of one of each of those items, and I would transfer them from pack to pack to pack, because I depending on whether I'm hunting deep or temperatures dictate what pack I use. I have a lot of different packs that I use. So sometimes if you're transferring gear from pack to pack between each hunt, it's easy to forget stuff. So this year, I'm actually going to start having all my packs actually loaded up with that kind of stuff already. That way, I'm not having to transfer stuff. All I have to do is basically put my food in there and whatever clothes I'm going to need for that day, and that's it.
That's a great idea.
I know, speaking of experience, you almost want to keep a whole case of bow hangers in your truck, because I have the worst tendency of leaving them up in the tree and not realizing it until the next morning.
Yeah. And like my truck, I keep a case of water in it, and I keep a tote with plenty of food in it. That way I've always got those two items with me all the time. You don't want to leave the truck without your water or some kind of food, and if you're running late getting to a hunt, last thing you want to have to do is stop at a convenience store to load up on food and water or Gatorade or whatever else you want to drink. Have your truck stocked, and ready to go.
Yeah, because that's important for us, as deep as we all kind of hunt, is like that can make a difference between you bonking or whatever, just getting in, or, if you kill an animal, getting him out, it's going to be rough if you bonk, because you don't have any calories left.
That's right.
Well, cool. Well, I think that pretty much does it. Anything else you guys want to add? Any questions? Any info? Did we miss anything?
Well, one thing I would like to add is this is so simple but so powerful. If you're not getting what you want to get from what you're doing, change what you're doing. Changing what you're doing will change your results. So don't get complacent. Don't keep doing the same thing over and over and over. I mean, that's the definition of it. Insanity is doing the same things over and over, expecting different results. So, change things up, make things happen.
Yep. You only lose the hands you don't play.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this. It was a kind of a knowledge dump, is like what I would call it. And we really appreciate your time. I know you got to work tonight, so we'll let you get off here and get some rest. And, hope to share camp with you this year. I know we plan that every year, and it just hasn't happened yet, but
yeah,
I hope to make that happen this year. And really appreciate you, being a guy that we can lean on when we have questions, and, being a good buddy, and, you're a good man. So we're honored to have you on.
Well, I appreciate it.
Well, until next time, this is Timber Ninja Radio. Make sure hit that subscribe button anywhere you listen to your fix, so we can pay our bills. All right, I'm going to stop recording here.